Daniel Clayt Aker, September 27, 2018. On the evening of Saturday, March 11, 2000, Daniel Aker, 28, and Marquette Markey George, 32, were at the Boston Loose nightclub outside Sulphur Springs, Texas, with friends and family. Witnesses recalled that an argument broke out between Aker and George. Afterward, Aker was heard saying, "I'm going to kill that bitch," and even told someone to relay the threat to George. His aggressive behavior led to him being thrown out of the club. Aker returned several times that night, asking about George's whereabouts. His sister testified that he threatened violence with a pocket knife and later an axe, warning that anyone he found with George would pay. The following morning, Aker spent hours searching for her, declaring he would not allow anyone to make a fool out of him. Around 9:15 a.m., Aker appeared at George's parents' home asking for her. Her mother warned him that no one was worth killing over, but Aker dismissed her concerns. Between 10:45 and 11 a.m., a man other than Aker dropped George off at her home. Aker confronted her outside, forced her into his truck, and drove off erratically. Witness Thomas Middy saw George attempt to escape multiple times, only for Aker to catch her. He also heard a loud strike or slap during the ordeal. Brody Young later saw a man forcefully pull a woman from a truck and leave her on the roadside. Cedil Farrell discovered George's body and called authorities. The autopsy revealed severe injuries: crushed facial bones, a shattered skull base, broken ribs and clavicle, and extensive lacerations to the heart, lungs, liver, and leg. Hemorrhaging indicated strangulation, but blunt force injuries were deemed sufficient to cause death. The medical examiner concluded George was likely dead or near death before being ejected from the vehicle. At trial, Aker admitted to abducting George but denied strangling or fatally striking her. He claimed she jumped from his truck and that any injuries were accidental. Testimony from a friend, Sabrina Ball, described a prior incident 2 weeks earlier when George had begged for help, fearing Aker would kill her. Deputy Sheriff Anderson corroborated that George had previously attempted to escape Aker's truck. Aker had a criminal history, including prior burglary convictions and multiple paroles. In 2001, a jury convicted him of capital murder and sentenced him to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the sentence in 2003. During later federal proceedings, forensic testimony suggested George's injuries were most consistent with being run over by a vehicle. Despite this, courts concluded that the totality of evidence supported the original conviction, noting that blunt force injuries were fatal regardless of whether she jumped or was struck by the truck. Aker and his attorneys consistently maintained that he did not kill George and that she jumped from the truck. On the day of his execution, George's brother Christopher watched from an adjacent room. Aker had no family or friends present. When asked for a final statement, he simply said, "No, sir." At 6:25 p.m., the lethal injection was administered and Daniel Aker was pronounced dead. Robert Moreno Ramos, November 14, 2018. In Progreso, Texas, along the U.S.-Mexico border, Ramos lived with his wife Leticia and their two young children, Abigail and Jonathan. In November 1991, Ramos began an affair with Marisa Robledo, a woman he met during a visit to Austin. By February 1992, they were planning to get married. On the night of Friday, February 7, neighbors reported hearing a woman scream and vulgar language coming from the Ramos household. In the following weeks, church members visited the Ramos home, but the man gave conflicting explanations about his family's absence. He claimed they were moving to California or had died in a car accident in Mexico, and he could not provide specifics. On February 10, Ramos married Robledo and moved her into his home. By March, his cousin pressed him about the missing family. Ramos offered inconsistent stories, claiming the family was in Austin, San Antonio, or Mexico. Letitia's sister finally reported the family missing. When police arrived at Ramos's home on March 30, he gave yet more contradictory accounts and was arrested on outstanding traffic warrants. A search of the Ramos home on April 6 revealed extensive blood evidence throughout the bedroom, hallway, and bathroom. The children's toys and the family's clothing were hidden in the attic. Ramos initially claimed he found his wife and children dead and had buried them himself, later changing his story to suggest his wife had mortally wounded herself and that he only delivered a fatal blow to her head. Officers exhumed the bodies of Leticia, Abigail, and Jonathan from beneath the newly tiled bathroom floor. A forensic pathologist testified that all three had died from blunt force trauma, likely from a hammer, and that the bodies had been buried within 12 to 24 hours of their deaths. A small blood-stained sledgehammer was later recovered from Ramos's residence in Mexico. At sentencing, Ramos's 19-year-old son testified about years of physical and verbal abuse, while another witness recalled that Ramos had married her daughter in 1988 only for the woman to disappear a year later. A jury convicted Ramos of capital murder in March 1993 and sentenced him to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction in 1996. Years later, Ramos's case became part of an international legal controversy. In 2003, the International Court of Justice ruled that the U.S. had violated the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations by failing to notify the Mexican consulate of Ramos's arrest. President George W. Bush directed state courts to review such cases, but Texas courts declined to reopen Ramos's case, and the Supreme Court upheld the decision in 2008. Ramos continued to challenge his conviction on consular rights and mental health grounds, but courts consistently denied his claims. Human rights experts and the United Nations appealed for clemency, citing violations of international law. Despite these efforts, the Supreme Court denied the last-minute stay of execution. No family members or victims' relatives attended Ramos's execution. Only media representatives and prison officials were present. In his final statement, Ramos said, "I am thankful for all the hard work the Mexican consulate put in a fight over my death sentence. I am getting my gold watch that it took the governor 30 years to forge. Thank you, God. Lord, send me a chariot. I am ready." Ramos was pronounced dead by lethal injection at 9:36 p.m. Joseph Christopher Garcia, December 4, 2018. Garcia was originally convicted of murder for killing Miguel Luna in 1996 during a drunken altercation. He later became part of the infamous Texas Seven. The Texas Seven was a group of prisoners who escaped from the John B. Connally unit near Kennedy, Texas on December 13, 2000. Their escape sparked a massive manhunt across the state. Over a month later, between January 22 and 24, 2001, 6 of the 7 were captured, thanks in large part to tips generated by the TV program America's Most Wanted. The 7th member took his own life before authorities could apprehend him. During their time on the run, the Texas Seven committed a series of crimes, including robbery. Their flight ended in violence when Irving, Texas police officer Aubrey Wright Hawkins was shot and killed while responding to one of their robberies. The surviving members were eventually tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for Hawkins' murder. The case remains one of the most notorious prison escapes in Texas history, highlighting both the dangers of violent fugitives and the role of public vigilance in bringing them to justice. Garcia's last words were, "Dear Heavenly Father, please forgive them, for they know not what they do." Alvin Avon Braziel Jr., December 11, 2018. On the evening of Tuesday, September 21, 1993, 18-year-old Braziel lay in wait on the grounds of Eastfield College in Mesquite, Dallas County. At 8:45 p.m., he stepped out from some bushes and confronted newlyweds Douglas and Laura White, brandishing a pistol and demanding money. When the couple explained they had none, Braziel shot Douglas, 27, twice in the head, killing him. He then dragged Laura, 23, into the bushes and essayed her before disappearing into the night. Despite the darkness, the crime scene was well lit, and Laura had a clear view of her attacker for 10 to 20 minutes. She worked with a police sketch artist, and while the first drawing did not resemble him, a second, completed months later, accurately depicted Braziel. However, a 1994 photo lineup failed to yield an identification. In February 1996, Braziel essayed a 15-year-old girl, resulting in a conviction and a 5-year prison sentence beginning in April 1997. DNA collected during that case was later matched to Laura White's 1993 essay. In January 2001, police presented her with a photo lineup of 6 black men of similar age, and she immediately identified Braziel. He was subsequently charged with the capital murder of Douglas White. At trial, Laura testified about the horrific events. Braziel became enraged when they said they had no money, threatened Douglas, and mocked their prayers before shooting him. She described his cold remark, "Where is your God at now?" as he delivered the fatal shots. Braziel, meanwhile, denied any involvement in the crime. The trial included emotionally intense moments, including when the prosecutor showed Laura a photo from her husband's autopsy, provoking her to cry loudly. The defense requested a mistrial, but the judge denied it. The prosecution also presented evidence of Braziel's prior criminal behavior, including a carjacking, a high-speed police chase, and probation violations. In July 2001, a jury found Braziel guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction and sentence in October 2003, and all subsequent appeals were denied. On the day of his execution, his lawyers attempted a last-minute appeal regarding the prosecutor's conduct with the autopsy photo, but it was too late to halt the procedure. In his final statement, Braziel expressed gratitude to his friends and supporters, apologized once again to Laura White for her husband's death, and spoke of his love for the White family and his own daughter Tashel. "I'm finished, Warden. You may proceed," he said. The lethal injection was administered, and Braziel was pronounced dead at 7:19 p.m. He was the 13th and final inmate executed by Texas in 2018. Robert Mitchell Jennings, January 30, 2019. On Tuesday, July 19, 1988, 30-year-old Jennings and his accomplice, 26-year-old David Harvell, carried out a robbery at an adult movie theater in Houston, but the two did not stop there. Later, they entered an adult bookstore in the Greenway area, armed with Harvell's gun. Inside, Houston police officer Elston Howard, 24, was present, arresting the store clerk, Larry Overholt, for operating a pornographic video arcade without a municipal permit. Howard was wearing a Vice Raid jacket. According to Overholt, Jennings walked directly up to Howard and fired 2 shots, causing him to collapse. He then fired a 3rd shot into Howard before robbing Overholt and fleeing the store. During their escape, Jennings told Harvell he had shot a security guard. Harvell, alarmed, ordered Jennings out of the car, but Jennings refused. In the ensuing confrontation, Harvell shot Jennings once in the hand. Jennings was later arrested at Ben Taub Hospital, while Harvell was apprehended days later at his mother's house in Euless. In a recorded confession, Jennings admitted to the shooting and expressed remorse, stating he would face whatever punishment he had coming. Jennings' criminal history traced back to his teenage years. At 14, he was declared a juvenile delinquent and placed on probation. By 17, he was convicted of aggravated robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Released in March 1978, he soon returned to crime, receiving a 30-year sentence for another aggravated robbery conviction. Paroled in May 1988, he embarked on a 2-month spree of 6 armed robberies, culminating in the murder of Officer Howard. He had previously robbed the same bookstore just 12 days earlier. At trial in July 1989, Jennings was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction in January 1993. Harvell, who had several prior convictions and was on parole at the time, was convicted of aggravated robbery and sentenced to 55 years, though he has since been released. Jennings' appeals centered on his defense team's handling of mitigating evidence. His lawyers did not call his mother or sister to testify during the punishment phase, nor did they review a report suggesting Jennings might have mild retardation and organic brain dysfunction. The courts concluded that his educational accomplishments contradicted claims of mental impairment. In federal court, a 2012 ruling acknowledged deficiencies in the defense's investigation, but ultimately did not prevent the reinstatement of his death sentence. The Fifth Circuit and the U.S. Supreme Court subsequently upheld rulings against him. Jennings' execution was scheduled for 2016. In the days leading up to it, his attorneys filed last-minute appeals arguing that mitigating evidence had not been properly considered. All were denied. On the evening of his execution at the Huntsville unit, over 100 police officers gathered outside, and the Thin Blue Line Motorcycle Club revved their engines in tribute to Officer Howard. As he entered the viewing room, Jennings asked the prison chaplain if he knew the name of the slain officer. "To my friends and family, it was a nice journey," Jennings said in his final statement. "To the family of the police officer, I hope this finds you peace, and be well and stay safe. Enjoy life's moments because we never get them back. Life mate, see you at the crossroads." The lethal injection was administered and Jennings was pronounced dead at 6:33 p.m. Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo described the day as a solemn occasion and a celebration of a life well lived by Officer Howard. Billy Wayne Cobble, February 28, 2019. Billy Cobble, a man with a long history of violence, married his third wife, Karen Vicka, in July 1988. The couple lived in Axtell, a small village east of Waco, Texas, just across the street from her parents and down the road from her brother. After a year of marriage, Vicka informed Cobble that she wanted a divorce and told him to move out. On the evening of Friday, August 20, 1989, Vicka went to a bar with a friend. Cobble, lying in wait, hid in the trunk of her car. As she began to drive home, he entered the passenger side, holding a knife to her ribs, and demanded she drive to a nearby field. There, he pulled out a roll of black electrical tape and threatened her, saying if he could not have her, no one else could. After about 2 hours, Vicka managed to convince him she would reconsider the divorce, and he released her unharmed. Vicka reported the kidnapping to her brother, Bobby Vicka, a police officer. Afterward, he got her a German Shepherd for protection. Days later, Cobble remarked to Karen, "That's a big mean dog you've got." Soon after, the dog was found dead in front of her house. On Tuesday, August 29, Cobble, then 40 years old, carried out a meticulously planned series of attacks. He waited for Karen to return from work, then handcuffed her 3 daughters, aged 10 to 16, tied their feet, and taped their mouths closed. He cut the phone lines to her house before heading down the street to Bobby's home, where he fatally shot him in the neck during a struggle. Cobble then went to Karen's parents' home, killing Robert and Zelda Vicka, age 64 and 60, and cut the phone lines there as well. Returning to Karen's house, he confronted her, revealed the murders, and told her to kiss her children goodbye before handcuffing her and driving her to a remote area. During the drive, Karen freed one hand and tried to seize the steering wheel, causing the car to swerve into a ditch. She also attempted to fire one of Cobble's guns, which misfired. Cobble pistol whipped her and continued the ordeal, eventually stabbing at her head with a knife while driving. The chase ended when a sheriff's patrol car pursued them, and Cobble crashed into a parked vehicle. He was arrested with Robert Vicas's watch and wallet and carrying 2 revolvers. During his confession, Cobble admitted to killing Bobby, Robert, and Zelda, while Karen testified to the horror of witnessing his actions. He showed her Bobby's gun, $1,000 taken from her mother, and pointed out her father's truck outside. He told her she was lucky he had not harmed the children further. Cobble's criminal history was extensive. His first wife, Pam Woolley, testified to his escalating violence, including being hit with a baseball bat, slapped to the door, and punched in the face. His second wife, Candy Ryan, described repeated head injuries and a switch-type personality capable of sudden rage. Additional testimony revealed that Cobble had molested a babysitter, essayed a cousin, and assaulted a niece during earlier marriages. At 15, Cobble was diagnosed with a sociopathic personality disturbance. He enlisted in the Marines at 17, serving a 4-year tour in Vietnam. Though honorably discharged, he was not recommended for re-enlistment due to conduct violations and convictions. During his 18 years on death row, Cobble attempted to argue he had reformed. Fellow inmates testified he was helpful, even-tempered, and respected authority. However, prosecutors countered that his prison cell contained numerous pictures of young girls, and Karen testified he had maintained a weird evil grin at her during court appearances. Cobble, in interviews, deflected responsibility, claiming, "God is in total control. He allows things to happen for his purpose," and questioned the death penalty itself as based on hate and revenge. In a final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, Cobble's lawyers argued that his trial lawyers had wrongfully conceded his guilt. The court denied the appeal. On the day of his execution, Cobble invited 5 witnesses, including his 2 sons and daughter-in-law. When asked for a last statement, he said, "That'll be $5, repeated it to his family, and nodded goodbye. As the lethal injection began, his sons, Gordon and Dalton Cobble, along with other family members, became emotional and physically confrontational, yelling obscenities. They were removed by officers and later faced charges for resisting arrest. Billy Cobble was pronounced dead at 6:24 p.m., closing the chapter on one of Texas's most violent and notorious criminal cases. John William King, April 24, 2019. King, a white supremacist, was sentenced to death in 1999 for the brutal murder of James Byrd Jr., a crime that shocked the nation and is often referred to as a modern-day lynching. On June 7, 1998, James Byrd Jr., an African-American man, accepted a ride home from King and his accomplices, Lawrence Russell Brewer and Sean Allen Berry. Rather than taking him home, the trio drove east out of town to a remote clearing in the woods. There, a violent struggle occurred in which the men beat Byrd and sprayed him with black paint. In a horrifying act of racial hatred, they chained Byrd by his ankles to the back of Berry's pickup truck and dragged him along a rural road for roughly 3 miles. At one point, Byrd's body struck the ragged edge of a concrete drainage ditch, resulting in the severing of his limbs and head from his torso. Following this brutal murder, the men dumped Byrd's mutilated remains in Jasper's segregated African-American cemetery before casually attending a barbecue. Investigators found evidence linking King and Brewer to white supremacist groups, establishing that the murder was motivated by racial hatred and classifying it as a hate crime. King, who had recently been released from a Texas prison, claimed he had previously been gang essayed by black inmates, which he cited as a motivating factor, though this did not mitigate the crime in the eyes of the law. King was accused specifically of beating Byrd with a bat before the victim was dragged to his death. All 3 men were tried and convicted for their roles in the crime, with King ultimately receiving a death sentence. King refused to say any last words. Larry Ray Swearingen, August 21, 2019. Swearingen was convicted of murdering Melissa Trotter during the course of either an aggravated kidnapping or an aggravated essay. According to the prosecution, the crime occurred after Trotter rejected Swearingen's advances, which angered him. In response, he strangled her using pantyhose and left her body in a wooded area. Her body remained undiscovered for approximately 25 days. When found, Trotter was lying on her back with her clothing pulled up beneath her arms and one shoe missing. Her jeans were still on with the fly closed, though one pocket had been torn, exposing her red underwear. Investigators noted that there were no scratches on her skin and no soil on her shoes, suggesting she had not struggled physically with her assailant. She did have a bruise on her face, a neck injury that could have been caused by a knife, and other bruises that suggested attempted essay. Forensic evidence connected the pantyhose used to strangle Trotter directly to Swearingen's home. In addition, he attempted to mislead investigators by writing a letter to his mother in Spanish, pretending to be from a woman who implicated her boyfriend as the murderer. At trial, handwriting analysis proved the letter was written by Swearingen himself, further implicating him in Trotter's death. In his final statement, Swearingen said, "Lord forgive them, they don't know what they are doing." After making this remark, the lethal injection was administered. Swearingen described the experience as it happened. "I can hear it going into my veins. I can taste it. Burning in the right arm. Don't feel anything in the left." He was pronounced dead at 6:47 p.m. Billy Jack Crutsinger, September 4, 2019. On Sunday, April 6, 2003, 48-year-old Crutsinger entered the Fort Worth home of Patricia Siren, 71, and her mother, Pearl Magurica, 89, and stabbed both women to death. He stole several items, including credit cards and Siren's Cadillac. The victims' bodies were discovered 2 days later, and the blood-stained Cadillac was found outside the Fort Worth bar. Crutzinger's bloodied clothing was recovered from a nearby trash bin. Detectives tracked purchases made on Siren's credit card and located Crutsinger at a bar in Galveston, where he was arrested on April 9. He confessed to the murders and revealed the locations of additional evidence. Blood at the crime scene was matched to him. At trial, the defense argued that his confession was inadmissible due to an illegal arrest. While the trial court acknowledged the arrest was technically illegal, it ruled the officer's conduct was not purposeful or flagrant, and that Crutzinger's confession was voluntarily given after he had been informed of his rights. Crutsinger had previous convictions, including reckless injuries to an elderly person, robbery, and driving offenses. A jury found him guilty of capital murder in September 2003 and sentenced him to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction and sentence in May 2006, and all subsequent state and federal appeals were denied. 3 of Crutzinger's friends attended his execution. No family members of the victims were present. In his last statement, he said, There is a lot of this I don't understand, but the system is not completely right. It's not completely wrong, but it's something that has to be done until something better comes along. But I am at peace with that, and I am okay, and I can live with that. He thanked his friends and expressed his belief in Jesus. As the lethal injection was administered, he said, "I feel it in my left arm. It is kind of burning." After that, he lost consciousness. Crutsinger was pronounced dead at 6:40 p.m. Mark Anthony Soliz, September 10, 2019. On Tuesday, June 22, 2010, 28-year-old Soliz, along with Jose Ramos, began an 8-day crime spree in Fort Worth, Texas. They burglarized the home, stealing 5 guns, and later committed armed robberies, carjackings, and a drive-by shooting. During the spree, Soliz fatally shot Ruben Martinez in the neck and killed Nancy Weatherly during a home invasion. Soliz and Ramos used stolen vehicles to flee the scene, and Fort Worth police tracked them through stolen vehicles and surveillance. Soliz was arrested after a brief foot chase, while Ramos later confessed to several crimes and was sentenced to life in prison. At trial, Soliz admitted his role in Weatherly's death, appending to his typed confession the handwritten sentence, "It was me that shot that woman." Estrada, a witness, testified that Soliz had bragged about killing Weatherly and ridiculed her. Forensic evidence confirmed that a 9mm pistol stolen during the spree matched the bullet recovered from Weatherly's home. Soliz had at least 7 prior felony convictions, including theft, burglary, and possession of prohibited weapons. Despite claims of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which his lawyers argued made him functionally intellectually disabled, all appeals in state and federal court were denied. The jury found Soliz guilty of capital murder in March 2012 and sentenced him to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his sentence in June 2014. He spent only 7.5 years on death row and chose not to pursue a final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Members of Nancy Weatherly's family attended his execution. In his final statement, Soliz repeatedly apologized to the victims' relatives, addressed his witnesses and supporters, expressed gratitude for his fate, and acknowledged his parents. He concluded, "Mr. Warden, I'm ready." The lethal injection was administered shortly after 6 p.m., and he was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. Robert Sparks, September 25, 2019. On Saturday, September 15, 2007, 33-year-old Sparks entered the Dallas home of his wife, Char Agnew, and her children after midnight. He stabbed Agnew 18 times in her bed, then murdered his stepsons, Harold, 9, and Raekwon, 10, stabbing them repeatedly. He restrained his stepdaughters, Lacania, 14, and Garisha, 12, and essayed them in the living room and bathroom. Sparks told the girls their mother and brothers were dead and claimed the deaths were their fault. He locked them in a closet, moved the dresser in front of the door, and left the house. Sparks drove to his mother's home to borrow a car, then visited his former girlfriend, informing her of the murders. He briefly called the police to report the crimes, then fled on a bus to Austin, returning to Dallas a few days later. After his arrest, he claimed he had been poisoned by his family and requested polygraph and toxicology tests, which were inconclusive. Investigators also recovered the tape Sparks had left, containing only rambling complaints against his family. At trial, the prosecution highlighted Sparks' prior criminal history, including a 12-year prison sentence for aggravated robbery completed in May 2003. A jury convicted him of capital murder in December 2008 and sentenced him to death. Appeals claiming unfair trial and intellectual disability were denied, including a last-minute request for a stay by the U.S. Supreme Court, with Justice Sonia Sotomayor noting concern over a bailiff's tie, but allowing the execution to proceed. 6 members of the Agnew family, including both stepdaughters, attended the execution. In his last statement, Sparks said, "I am sorry for the hard times, and what hurts me is that I hurt y'all. I love y'all. I am ready." The lethal injection began shortly after, and Sparks was pronounced dead at 6:39 p.m. Justin Grant Hall, November 6, 2019. In 2002, Hall and Ted Murgatroyd were acquaintances who shared mutual friends and frequently spent time at a house in El Paso owned by Chase Hale. On Monday, October 28, around 4 p.m., Melanie Bilhartz, a 29-year-old woman who was close friends with Murgatroyd, arrived at the house. Murgatroyd asked her for a ride to a convenience store. She agreed, moving into the passenger seat while Murgatroyd took the wheel. According to Murgatroyd, on the return trip from the store, he made a sarcastic remark that upset Bill Hart, causing her to flip out and physically assault him, demanding that he get out of her truck. In response, a physical struggle ensued. Murgatroyd claimed that Bill Hart bit him as he was exiting the truck, and he struck her on the lip in self-defense. Bill Hart drove back to the house, with Murgatroyd following on foot. Once he arrived at the house, Murgatroyd noticed Bill Hart sitting in her truck parked in front. Several of his friends, including Hall, came out to speak with him and informed him that Bill Hart intended to call the police to report the assault. Hall, who was 21 at the time, told Murgatroyd that he did not want the authorities to discover the methamphetamine lab inside Hales' house. Hall then stated that he planned to kill Bill Hart. A few hours later, 3 to 5 hours after the incident, Hall arrived at the house in Bill Hart's truck with her body in the back. He instructed Murgatroyd to gather a shovel and machete so they could bury her. They drove to New Mexico together, where Hall told Murgatroyd to remove Bill Hart's fingers to prevent any DNA evidence from being collected from under her nails. Hall then disposed of the body, minus the fingers, and both he and Murgatroyd returned to El Paso. On November 23, authorities began questioning Murgatroyd about Bill Hart's disappearance. He led police to her body. Coincidentally, on the same day, Deputy Tommy Baker of the Hale County Sheriff's Office noticed a truck parked on the highway near Plainview. He approached to perform a welfare check on the occupants. Without asking for identification, Baker advised them to move along to a safer location. After they left, Baker was informed by dispatch that the truck's owner had been reported missing. He pulled the truck over again and, during his investigation, discovered that the owner had been murdered. Hall, who was driving the vehicle, was arrested for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. He subsequently confessed to killing Bill Hart. At Hall's trial, the medical examiner testified that Bill Hart had been strangled with an electrical cord wrapped around her neck 3 times. She also suffered fractures to her nasal bones, jaw, right hand, and ribs. The missing fingers were also documented. In addition to Murgatroyd's testimony, Chase Hale testified that Hall had confessed to killing Bill Hart. Hall already had a criminal record. In February 2000, he had been convicted of 3 separate crimes: burglary of a habitation, burglary of a building, and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, each occurring in separate incidents. He was sentenced to 3 concurrent 2-year terms and was discharged upon completion of his sentences, including time served in jail awaiting trial in November 2001. In April 2002, Hall was charged with the shooting murder of Arturo Diaz, 28, whose body was discovered in El Paso on April 10. Prosecutors treated this killing as a hate crime because Diaz was transgender. Hall had been out on a $70,000 bond for Diaz's murder when he killed Bill Hart. A jury found Hall guilty of capital murder in February 2005 and sentenced him to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction and sentence in June 2007. All subsequent appeals in state and federal courts were denied. In March 2017, Hall spoke during a court hearing saying, "I killed Melanie and I killed Arturo. I accept the punishment for it and I am ready to get it over with, you know." He explained that his lawyer's motions requesting DNA testing had been a stall tactic and asked to drop his appeals. Despite this, Hall's attorneys continued to file appeals without his consent, arguing that he was mentally incompetent to be executed. On the day of his execution, Hall addressed the families of both of his victims, apologizing for the pain and suffering he caused and stating that the events should have never happened. He also expressed love for his own family. Finally, turning to the warden, he said, "I'm ready." The lethal injection procedure was then carried out and Hall was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.